let's begin with what is maqam, and like, for those who aren't familiar with what it is, what made you want to use the system to be the home for the project?
So I'm going to geek out on my music theory here for a little bit, so bear with me. But in Western music theory, you have your scales and your modes. So basically, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is your like Western major scale, and most of Western music is either in a major scale or a minor scale, and you have modes within that as well. And that's kind of the music theory that I learned when I was doing my degree in music in Sussex. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I started learning the oud, which is a Middle Eastern fretless. Yeah, shout out to the oud. Wouldn't have been here without you, oud. About 3 years ago, I went to the Arab British Centre and started learning the oud, which is a Middle Eastern fretless instrument. And because it's fretless, similar to a violin, I guess, but yeah, specifically with the oud, you're playing notes that exist in between the notes that exist on the piano. So you therefore need a whole nother theoretical musical system to kind of notate that and play that music, and that musical system is called maqam. And what I really fell in love with about the maqam musical system as a storyteller and someone that just loves like telling stories through music was that unlike Western scales and modes, each specific maqam has very specific moods and narratives attached to them. So Bayat Saba, for example, means longing for a place or person you'll never see again. And lots of traditional repertoire that I learned in Bayat Saba is written about Palestine, for example, because those themes of death and displacement have been unfortunately relevant for a very long time. So that's a good example of a way that I used Bayat Saba to also write a song about Palestine, which is My Blood Is in the Soil, which is the last song you hear. And yeah, the concept for the album was basically to write a different song, every different song on the album in a different maqam, tapping into the narrative principles of each maqam to tell my own story. And how I literally made a 38-slide presentation on Canva titled Maqam 1, our debut album, and sent it to about 7 of my trusted musicians and producers before I started making the project, outlining exactly what the intention is, which was basically, to write a different song in each maqam, and that be the only limitation. And because that was like the through line limitation, that we had that intention, it meant that we could tap into as many genres as we wanted to and go to as many different places musically and lyrically, because we had that really clear intention from the start, which is why it taps into like jazz, heavy bass.
There's so many different genres that comes through in the music and different sounds, and I think the way that you've approached this, you almost tore up the rule book a little bit, and you've really meshed different genres and styles within each musical chapter. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the process was like making the music in the studio? Like, how did you go about bringing it to life?
So as I said, I obviously made that neurotic 38-slide presentation that I sent to the producers, which I don't think is a normal way to make music. But in that presentation, I kind of said, I linked to playlists of each of the maqams. I added sheet music and examples of videos of people playing each maqam, so the people involved in making it with me could get their ears around it. But no one really had an understanding of maqam stepping into the room other than me. So what I would do is basically step into the studio each day with who I had chosen to be in the session that day, and just kind of naturally pick up on what we were talking about in the moment. So on the day that we came in and we were all talking about Palestine, we were really upset about it. That was the day that I was like, okay, let's use Bayat Saba today, let's tap into that energy and make this kind of song. And then on a different day, I think we'd come into the studio and we were talking about, the producer had moved to Berlin recently. I was just about to move in with my partner, and so we were talking about these themes of like freedom, which Maqam Kurd really lends itself to. So then I was like, okay, we're talking about themes of freedom. That's the vibe in the room. This is the maqam for the job. Get my sheet music out. Everyone, let's start playing around with this. And it sounds much more strict than it was. It was fun. It was a fun time. And that's how we made the music, basically, starting from that place and then structuring the album around each individual song.
Yeah, so I think it feels like you really kind of had a really conceptual approach to this, and you know, you brought up themes of dehumanization and also brought in personal narratives. Like, it feels very personal watching and listening to it. And it really brings up a lot of conflicting emotions that you had, especially in, you know, the song, you know, Dogtooth, and then going straight into Ugly. You know, the two really contrasting songs, but I think it's really beautiful to kind of to see how that's, you know, been brought to life.
Do you want me to speak about this?
Yeah, no, please do, because I think, you know, the personal themes, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
So Dogtooth was a poem that I wrote, and about feeling dehumanized and about feeling like the Western world kind of values the lives of people that look like me and my family less than dogs. Like, I really strongly do feel like if what was still happening to the Palestinians today was happening to like dogs, that the Western world would have stepped in. And that's a really horrible place to like live your life every day, like knowing that that's the kind of value you hold in the world. And so that's where that track came from. And then Ugly, the first line being like, if I was brave enough to end it all years ago, and kind of talking about suicidal ideation. I think that was a really like raw but interesting place to start a debut album. Kind of, let's contextualize it there. Why do I feel so worthless? It's because of the themes that are coming up in Dogtooth. It's because of how the world's, you know, to say it makes you feel ugly is a complete understatement. It makes you feel like subhuman. And then from kind of track 3 to track 8, I feel like I'm almost a performing monkey, like dancing for the industry, saying, look how human I am, look at all these things I can do, look at this music I can write, look at the costumes I can put on, this is my family, kind of like begging to be humanized. And then we have that track of my parents in track 9, which I
was literally just about to lead on to that, as you mentioned family, and I think it's really beautiful that your family are involved in this project. And do you want to talk about the way that you approached that as well?
Yeah, so that was the last song that I actually put on the album. I always knew I wanted my family to be a part of it in one way or another, specifically my parents. But yeah, I chose track 9 to be a song of my parents going back to back for nearly 6 minutes, talking about how much they love each other, in order to humanize specifically my dad in that situation, because I nearly called that song Women and Children, because of the kind of women and childrening we've seen what's happening in Palestine, almost as if the innocent men that are being killed don't matter. And I think there's so much dehumanization of Muslim men, Arab men, when they are some of the kindest and most loving people I've ever come across in my life. And I really wanted to make that song to highlight how my dad speaks about my mum, also the way she speaks about him, and to highlight the kind of kind and endlessly loving person that he is. And for that to be almost like this epic saga of a love story that happens in track 9, and then track 10, My Blood is in the Soil, to be a reminder of all of the lives, all of the stories like that, the family lineages that are being ended every day still today, unfortunately. And so the album kind of works in this cycle of dehumanization, because then we go back to Dogtooth again and it all kind of makes sense in a different way.
It's also interesting the way that you structured the album and how you talk about cycles, and there are also kind of symbolism within the videos as well. Is it meant to be, you know, like you watch it and it's almost like a full cycle? Was that the intention for it?
Definitely musically that was the intention. I'm not sure visually if you have something you want to say about the round intention of it.
Yeah. Come on, Ahmed.
I mean, when we were kind of concepting and we were kind of drawing up the ideas of the films, they kind of were all very separate ideas. I guess, like you said, you were kind of studying like a ancient historical, like Arabic musical system, and for me, like that was like so exciting, that the fact that we were going to reference something so historic in an album that was almost like a pop piece of work, you know, that's like for your debut album. And I don't know, it was like one of the main things that came up was the idea of the garden. And in like Islamic culture, the garden is like the highest form of like human existence, you know. It's like Jannat is the garden, and in Sufi kind of belief and mystic belief, like the garden is like this pure place, a cyclical place. And I don't know, I think at the beginning we thought about the film taking place within the garden as this very like ornamented place that also like we do feel so dehumanized in, but there's so much abundance in that world. And I think that's why there's so much like ornamentation in the films, and there's so much like floral and fauna, and there's so much Islamic architecture in the films also. It should feel like a kind of cyclical world, I think.
There's so many little details throughout the film. I mean, we could literally talk about it all day. It was so beautiful. I know that one of the biggest inspirations that you referenced was the film The Colour of Pomegranates, and I think that's really quite evident within the work, in a really beautiful way, and you've kind of used it as a reference, but reinvented it and added your own. You've created your own universe. I wondered if you wanted to talk about that inspiration and then also how you communicated that to Furmaan and Rukaiyah.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen the film. I had a Pinterest board.
It's a really beautiful film.
I've seen the film. And I really was inspired by it. It's a film from the late 60s. I really recommend you go and watch it. You will love it. And it's kind of a poetic, cinematic depiction of this Armenian poet and musician's life. And it's kind of like a very avant-garde like look into their brain. It's not really a narrative that you follow. And I thought that was quite interesting because I very much felt like this album was like a look inside my brain. And, and what I loved about the visuals in The Colour of Pomegranates is that the camera doesn't move. In every single scene, the camera is in one place and the action is from what is just happening in front of the camera, the movement, the costumes. And it really forces you to kind of take a step back and like retrain your attention span. And I think there's a real kind of theme of resistance in the project, and I think I wanted to keep that theme of resistance with the visuals and be like, I'm not pandering to this bullshit. There being like 50,000 cuts in every, like, 'cause there's so much money spent in music videos, and it's so much, it's like an episode of Cocomelon for like kids, you know, it's like chop, 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 there's so much going on, fire, pyrotechnics, cars.
It's too much.
It's too much, and like that kind of feeding that beast of small attention spans is affecting music and affecting art in so many ways that I really wanted to make a conscious decision with this film that each song is going to be one shot, and you're going to sit there and you're going to watch it, and like that's it. You're going to have to really sit with that and take in the costume and stuff. And I think I brought that reference to you both and said, I think we should do something like this, one scene per song.
And it's super beautiful.
And I think you were inspired by Islamic miniatures, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think I haven't seen The Colour of Pomegranates, but I've seen a load of clips from it, and one thing that really struck me was how kind of dimensionless the film looks, and that to me spoke of like the Islamic miniature world in which like everything is just like on a surface and there's not really perspective. The perspective is the meaning you place upon the images, and yeah, I mean, I'm just obsessed with those visuals. The ornamentation, florals, the framing of it is something that I really wanted to incorporate, because I think one thing about this record musically is everything sits within the frame of Maqam, and it's like we can actually embody that. We can make it like visually real.
I feel like that comes across in so many different ways throughout the film. Like I was gonna say, there's so many. You're almost looking through these different arches into the scene, and I feel like that was a really beautiful way to embody what you just said. And Furmaan, how did you bring that to life, the really beautiful fluttering archways and like it's a recurring visual within the film, and do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, just on like the miniatures and like the kind of classical Indian and Muslim like miniatures, these are like depictions of like the kind of utopia, in like our culture, and that's why they're so decadent and they're so full of love and life and mystery and starlight. And I think that's kind of where we were trying to live in this world. But I mean, like, yeah, when we were concepting and making this, things were quite spontaneous, and we had such an incredible team of like artists involved in this. I think the way, like, I didn't ever really feel like I was the director of this piece, to be honest. I feel like it was all of us. It was everyone here. It was like Ben, the DOP. We had Joe, that was the gaffer, our lighting assistant, and Isabella, who was our art director also. It was quite like a cohesive decision between all of us. Like, I don't know, the conversation was very, very fluid the whole time. And
I feel like there's such a great synergy between the team that made this, and so many similarities, and you know, lots of shared experiences between you. Do you feel like that helped, you know, within making this, and like, what did it feel like bringing it to life all together, like you just said?
I mean, I'll bring this on.
Yeah.
I think it was really important actually, and it felt so fluid because the team and the crew actually really reflected the themes within the album. There wasn't anyone there really that we were having to like fill in on what this meant and where it was coming from. There was actually a lot of crying that went on set because people were really like, you're laughing because you were crying. Like, there was a lot of people that really connected to the themes. You know, we had like a lot of trans people in the crew. We had a lot of people that had been raised in Muslim households growing up that had maybe like moved away slightly and then were finding reconnection to the faith through the music on set as well. And so I think everyone on set was useful because everyone had a perspective that was really useful to the piece we were working on.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I heard the record, I wept, like fully cried my eyes out. And then Chloe sent over this amazing, I think it was a slideshow.
Yeah, it's always a slideshow.
It's
always a presentation.
It was so like intentional, and I think that there were like pull quotes and descriptions for every song on the record that just described like your personal experience, that not only spoke to like my personal experience, but like connecting it to the music and this like system, the Arabic system of maqam. I was just completely blown away. I couldn't believe that there was an artist making music that had always been like my dream to experience, just to witness. And so it was very, very emotional and yeah, overwhelming, amazing, wonderful. I can't sing your praises enough.
Thank
honestly.
you. Cool, Furmaan.
I mean, just like to double down on that, like, who like creates a debut album and decides to create it on like a historical music system in Arabic? Like, nobody does that. Like,
someone who is very talented and
it's quite incredible.
And I also as well just take this moment to shout out Louise Paley from my label Pace, because I think it's really something to talk about, like the fact that the label got behind this project as well, I think is amazing. Because yeah, as you said, most people would be like, what do you mean your debut album has no vocals on track 1 and track 9 is a 6-minute song of your mum and dad talking? Like, where are the hits? Where are the commercial songs? And I think the fact that Lou gave me the space to make the project that I wanted to make, actually we spoke about this a bit before, and I will talk about this now, because usually when people write albums, you're kind of expected to, you know, if there's 10 songs on the album, you make 100 songs plus, and then you pick kind of the best 10. And that method, okay, great, I suppose, for some people, but it also means that you can't really make anything conceptual that has an overarching theme, because you're basically just patchworking loads of different stuff. And what was really amazing about Lou's approach of being like, I trust you, that's why I signed you, make whatever you want to make, amazing lady, meant that, yeah, can we have a round of applause? It basically meant that the album was able to take this structure, because we went into the studio and made Ugly, for example, and I was like, that's a really ugly song, I want that to be the first time you hear my voice, I want that to be almost track 1. And then it meant that the next time we went to the studio, I was like, okay, we have Ugly, that's an ugly song, let's try and make the most beautiful song we can possibly make to follow that one. And that's where Alone at Last came from. And I think that this album would have only been able to take that structure if I had an amazing team like that. So I think it's really important for people in the industry side as well to be like, yeah, music can be conceptual, but you have to give the artist space to make something like that. So yeah, thanks again,
Before we start talking about post Maqam, what I want to kind of quickly just ask, like, do you guys have a favorite track from the album, or a favorite visual that you guys worked on for this?
It's so hard.
It is so hard because they're all incredible.
The one with my parents in it, I think, will hold a lot for me for a long time. I think it's something really special, and I'll only like value that more and more and more as time goes on. I mean, like, God forbid when they pass away, like, to have that on wax and to have that visual, because I've heard that story of them. Can I talk about how that song came about, actually, because I feel like I haven't mentioned it.
Please.
Like, obviously you're hearing my parents' voices one at a time, but how did we do that was basically, let me circle back to track 4. Alone at Last, track 4, I wrote about my partner Jai's dad passing away from cancer, which is really sad, like, for both of us. And that song is about us kind of having our freedom for the first time, being alone at last and moving into that house together. But that was the house that Jai grew up in, and that we kind of watched his dad slowly deteriorate until he passed away. And that song meant a lot for me, and so did those visuals, because I recorded the vocals for that in the room the last time I saw his dad was in that room. So it was very emotional recording that, and the visuals like really get me as well. But
it's a really stunning visual where you're sitting with the flowers in the foreground and we can see someone in the background.
Yeah. And those flowers that I'm kind of reading together, I guess, as well, that's kind of a depiction of our like 6-year-long relationship. And then I think it's really beautiful that you kind of circle back to that on track 9 with my parents, and then they have this flower chain that's the same one I'm building, but it's really long and it wraps all around them, and it's kind of like, oh, that's what a 30-year-long relationship looks like. But yeah, how that song with my parents came about, after losing Jai's dad and feeling very anxious suddenly about everyone around me's health, and really worried everyone around me was going to suddenly die, I really wanted them to be a part of this album. And I asked them both to go into separate rooms and kind of record on voice memos like how they feel about one another, and like what's the last thing that you'd want the other person to hear if it was the last thing they'd ever hear you say. I said, don't send it to each other, like just send it straight to me. So they went away and did that, sent me their voice notes, and it was so funny. I was typing it up and I could see that they kind of said stuff that poetically like linked to each other. So I didn't change any of their words, I just kind of cut it in a way that read more poetically to me, and then I recorded it in over the instrumental. And then we kind of trained an AI model to learn both of their voices, and then that's what you're hearing played back is like my voice mixed with both of their voices. I know AI obviously fuck AI in a lot of ways, but like in that specific instance it was a really interesting tool to have, like a piece of technology that's only been invented that week mixed with like Maqam, which is a centuries-old system. I geeked out and thought that was quite exciting.
Yeah.
And also, like, they never would have been able to record that in the studio. Like, it would have taken like 800 years to get the take right. So it made sense that I recorded it in time, in rhythm, and then we just had their voices through it. But yeah, that one definitely means the most to me. Watching the rest of the video, I was like, this is like torture for me, seeing on my face all the time.
No.
Like, so yeah, I'm happy to look at their faces for a little bit.
Rukaiyah, what about you?
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's the hardest question
It
I've
is.
been asked all week. But Tapestry is probably my favourite song on the record. I think the like generational trauma, generational love juxtaposition is something that really spoke to me personally. And I just loved that Chloe's mum, Inez, was part of that as well. It was really, really magical. But this idea, I think, what we wanted to do visually was show a kind of vision of someone being held, but someone also in a position of, I guess, stress. And I think it's just been made so beautifully as well. I cried when I saw that for the first time as well. Done a lot of crying. But also Morning is probably my favourite visual, because I think it's the references for me. We wanted to embody the oud because that's what the song is about, and that's another thing actually, circling back to the idea of kind of cyclical nature, in Chloe's deck, there was tons of like, the richness of the lyricism made it really, really easy to just come up with so many ideas around this project. So with Morning, that oud imagery that's prevalent in the track and visually, you know, through the picture, I just wanted to make it so that like she was within this instrument, because it is such an important part of the project. But also when I was thinking about, you know, how those strings look and how she can move amongst them, it's there's a sense of like restraint, which I think comes from having such a deep concept on a project, which I thought was really important to embody, and that it's not a limiter. It's actually something that can create so much beauty. And then also the kind of string imagery, like I was thinking a lot about like 90s catwalk and like that Chanel chain dress and like Gucci thongs for some reason, but I just like all of those references combined with these very, very ornate religious sensibilities is something I thought would be quite interesting to build upon. So yeah, I love that. I think it's so rich.
Wow, well explained. I think one of the most like poignant moments in the project was Ugly. I think Ugly was one of the most, it was the track that I related to the most on the whole album, and I think a lot of people like in the crew, in the cast also deeply connected to it. I mean, Ugly featured the most incredible Bolly Illusion, who is like an absolute icon. I don't know, it spoke to, I mean, we spoke about it the other day, and it was like being South Asian, you know, being trans, being a queer person in this society, living in England, living in the UK in this day and age, growing up during the 2010s, like what that felt like, you know, and what that experience is like, to not fit in within the binaries of something that's so colonial and so westernized, and to just not be able to fit into a system, you know, that was kind of what that song, well, when I first heard it, that's how I felt. And when we made that visual, it was kind of like, okay, we should have Bolly, like one of the most like well-known South Asian drag queens in London, if not like the world. And it was like, well, why don't we paint our faces white and like take away our brown skin and completely camouflage everything that we are, paint ourselves as these clowns that we are told that we are. And then we winged it, and you guys just like had this like conversation together with it on camera. You both like lip synced the same track, and I don't know, I was like shaking behind camera the whole time. It was incredible to watch. I think it brought up a lot of emotions. Yeah, I mean, if you want to.
Yeah, and with Ugly specifically, that track as well, like it's in Maqam Nahawand, and it says that song, you know, the Maqam theme outlined in Nahawand is like emotional extremes, really sad and heartbreaking, but can be uplifting if played fast. But it was really interesting following the guidance of the Maqam and being like, okay, let's turn the tempo up, let's make a really heartbreaking song, but do it fast. And I think that's where you do kind of get the emotional extreme from the track. And that just, obviously I'm such a geek when it comes to this kind of music theory stuff, but I think there's a lot of artists that are like, I just made a brand new genre. I just made the song of the summer. And it's like, no, you fucking haven't. Like, that genre has existed for such a long time. You just don't know anything. You don't research anything. You don't look into you don't know any of your history or musical past. So everything that you do, you think is groundbreaking. And it's like, if you actually look back and look at what's been made and look at the history, these people actually know what they're talking about. And there's a lot to be learned, and you can actually channel that into your music. And I would just encourage more people to like look back in order to look forward. You can only kind of make something, I think, you and groundbreaking if you know where you come from.
Yes. Yes. Her. How do I continue from that? I think, okay, so what is your vision post Maqam? I know that we've had discussions about, you know, where you see this going naturally. And you were talking about how you know, to go, you know, to look back, to look forward.
Mhm.
Is that what you're planning to do for, you know, the next chapter?
Yeah, I keep saying that my next album will probably be Maqam 2, and like everyone thinks that that's a joke, but like, I'm actually not joking. Like, when I sent out the initial deck to everyone, it says Maqam 1 on it, and I feel like, although, yeah, I know what I'm talking about with Maqam in a sense, I'm still very much like an entry level. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of this musical system, and that this will be something that I explore for many, many years in front of me. And going into the sessions on this album, because I was working with like Western producers that I'd met in London and Western instrumentalists, I was kind of coming in with my basic knowledge of Maqam, being like, let's try this thing, let's see if it works. And it did work, and it's really nice to have like a Western interpretation of this Maqam system. But I'm really interested on Maqam 2 to explore maybe working with like masters of Maqam, you know, instrumentalists that really know the system inside out, and then I become the student, and potentially like working with the same producers and other Western musicians, and us coming together and combining forces, and like, what does that sound like? I think that would be really interesting, and for me it would be nice to be like a student again.
Definitely. I feel like I'm excited to see, you know, what comes of Maqam 2, and I'm sure it will be the sequel. I'm sure it will be as beautiful and as powerful as, you know, the first offering. And I think, you know, congratulations on your debut album once again, because it is incredible. And, you know, congratulations to everybody who worked on it and brought it to life and poured their love into it, which I think is really evident throughout each piece that makes up the album. But yeah, before we wind down, I wondered if the audience wanted to ask any questions. So I'm gonna open the floor.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. If not, we'll yap for longer. So.
Oh, Jordan. Hello.
Alright. I don't know how we're going to do this. We might have to shout.
Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
A beautiful album and a beautiful visual as well. I just wanted to ask, at what point of like learning oud and finding out about Maqam did you decide that this was going to be what you would do for an album?
That's a good question, actually. I think as soon as I realised that there were stories attached to it, as soon as they kind of said this, you know, because I don't speak Arabic, and my main oud teacher mainly teaches in Arabic, so there was a lot of me being like, what does that word mean? What does that mean? Because everyone else in my class pretty much spoke Arabic, so I was trying to keep up, and when they would say, and I had to kind of uncolonize my musical brain as well, having grown up with a lot of Western music theory, being like, but who owns the rights to this? I can put this in my music. They were like, yeah, no one owns the rights. It's like anyone can kind of use that. And yeah, as soon as they said this isn't just a name that we call it. This means longing for a place or a person you'll never see again. This one means the desert at sunset. I was like, oh my God. It was literally like stumbling across like gold or magic. I was literally like, this is cheat codes for music. I know exactly now how to evoke the exact feeling I want from people in this music, and I felt just like so excited that I'd like stumbled across this pot of gold that they felt like none of my musical peers knew about, and I was like, I need to talk about Maqam. It's basically a good way for me to just yap about Maqam constantly to anyone that will listen. So yeah, that was how I knew. When I knew that it was going to be a really good tool to tell stories, I thought, let's do this. And I also think, I know I've been in the music industry like long enough to know that when you release a project, you get to do a lot of press, you get to do radio, you get to have a lot of conversations about it. And I thought, I don't want to just talk about a breakup or talk about this or talk about rubbish for like a whole year. When I have this platform, it's like, okay, if I have a platform on radio or press or whatever to talk about something, let's try and make a political album. Let's talk about something that's coming from Arabic culture. And try and, you know, that conversation needs to be had, and it kind of gives me a good way to talk about Palestine, talk about everything that's happening all the time. Like the radio stations and the press, they have to say what I say. So
they have to. Does anyone else have a question?
Hi. I just love everything, and I love the concept of the whole album. With each system and each story that belonged to each one, how did you like lend like all the different genres that you melted into each theme? Because I loved all these like different vibes coming from this way and this way, but then now afterwards you saying that like each one had like a certain story to tell, a certain energy. I just want to know how like your brain works to like put all that together.
It was basically, can everyone hear okay, by the way, can you hear the questions? Okay, it was basically how we tapped into different genres was me just like curating who was going to be in the room for what day, and I had this kind of group of Avengers of like producers and musicians, I always call them, and like I'm so stush with who I work with as well, like I don't really work with like many people, and I know who's good at what, and I know who's going to sound good together. And so for Ugly, for example, I knew that I wanted this kind of like heavy tune, and I was like, I'm going to call in techno, electronic, Supernair, Manny D, and I knew I wanted it not to just be a kind of like dance, like up-tempo tune. I wanted there to be some kind of melodic like depth to it as well. So I called in my bass player James to come in and play actual like acoustic bass on it, and then I wanted like really weird, just like fucked up, like ugly textures on it as well. So I called in my other producer Lapsang, who lives in Tokyo, but they were in London at the time, and they'd never met before, the three of them. I mean, Matt and James had met before, but all together we'd never made music together, and it just worked out perfectly, and I was just so smug and proud of myself. Like, I knew this would be great, and it's great. And yeah, we just were able to tap into different genres based on who I called in. Like, for My Blood It's in the Soil, I knew I wanted it to be more of a jazz tune, so I called in my drummer from years and years ago, Jono, who's like a jazz specialist, and I was like, here's some brushes, and I was like, James, here's some Maqam Saba sheet music, and you two just vibe. And like,
I could hear that as well in that track.
yeah.
Because when I looked at your earlier work, it kind of had that vibe
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, that was.
It was a lot of people that I'd worked with over all of the years, because I feel like such a big moment for me to have my debut album and to have like label backing behind it after being independent for so long. I did really want to, even though there was suddenly budget to kind of work with whoever I wanted, I was like, nope, these people have been with me from the beginning. I wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for them, so I'm going to find a way to get all of them involved in this in one way or another.
And you've almost developed your sound with them.
Yeah.
So it's a really beautiful way to kind of, it's going back to cycles.
Yeah.
Do we have time for a couple more?
Hey, unreal. I just like want to give you another. I feel like what really struck me was just like, how much the album is like a piece of art, and it kind of made me think about what plans you have in terms of performing it live, and like what that's gonna look like.
You're on something there. She's got it. She's tapped in on another level. Can we give anything away?
Please. Any secrets?
We can't say anything.
No.
You can.
Okay, we're basically planning on doing a performance art piece of the project, so it won't be like a standard gig, where we just play the songs. It will be directed by Furmaan, and it will be like very conceptual, and it will be in a brand new art space, which we're very excited about, so please come and see that. But I think, it's like I do feel like I'm not in this traditional music space. I find that like quite boring, and I think I do want to step more into like that kind of art world, so it's perfect that I found these lovely two. They're helping me step forward like into that as well. I think
but one thing that was really apparent to me working with Chloe and Furman also was that like she's such a bloody magnificent performer. Like everything from facial expression to the way, like if we were in a shot and Furman was saying be statuesque or embody this thing, Chloe just got it. And it was like, it was just magnificent to watch, because it not only, when you work with an artist that's kind of used to, being in a traditional music video and doing a bit of lip sync, you're like, okay, cool, yeah, we can get we can get some meaning out of this, but I think Chloe just had it like head to toe with the help of Ethan as well. And one thing that I was...
Where is Ethan?
Yeah, Ethan, amazing movement director. But one thing that we fixated on, that Ethan was amazing at pulling out of Chloe, was breath work and the intentionality behind breath and slowing down and stillness in the shots was, I mean, it was amazing. But you can see it, you can feel it through the music and through the visuals, and I think it is performance art. Even when you watch a live set, like in a standard venue, it feels like that. So
Thank you.
props to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Female?
One
There
more?
are female.
Yeah, female.
Katie?
I wanted to ask a question about food.
Oh yeah.
Because you were saying how there's no frets.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you then like build texture with other instruments to match that pitch and harmony?
It's a good question. This is something I would like to explore more on Maqam too. Because I think Shrek 2 is the best of all the Shreks. So I just stand by that sequels are a good thing. Because Shrek 2 really set the precedent there. But with it being fretless, there were quite a lot of challenges of tapping into those microtonal notes. And I think on my initial 38-page Canva presentation, I did say that I really wanted to explore auto-tuning to the microtones, to be like, we're gonna uncolonize auto-tune here and be like, no, it's not correct, it's not the wrong note, that is a note, we just don't recognize it as a note here. But it was quite actually a challenge to do that, and we didn't really manage to do that very successfully, so there isn't as many microtonal moments as I would like there to be. But that's why I think I would like on my next project to work with more people that understand that more, because my ear is still very much trained to Western tuning, and I'm trying to untrain it, but then there's the risk of I just sing out of tune at all my gigs, so it's how much untraining do I want to do? It's a bit risky. But stay tuned on Maqam too. Hopefully there will be a bit more exploration of that.
Okay.
Then?
One more. There's one in the corner.
I was a camera assistant and I worked in a documentary with Brian Daly, and they interviewed the head of YouTube Music, and at the end he was desperate to go, and they said, what's the best advice you have for our users for our channel?
Mm.
And he was like, don't get political, and then he just walked out of the room.
Doesn't
But I was
surprise
just
me.
thinking, do you think, because obviously you are openly political, and I think music is increasingly, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going into a new era where it's more there is more room to be political than there is for
The question was, do you think music is becoming more political and there's room for that? No, I don't think actually. I think there's probably in the kind of underground and in the niche, I think if you are outspoken politically, actually you can find a community that will go hard for you and really get behind you, and I think that's kind of where I am, which I really appreciate. But I think to become a pop star or anything like that, I mean, they're just a bunch of pussios. No one's talking about anything. And I think there was a long time where I was let me not say this and let me do this and let me just camouflage myself and I'll just put white makeup on and maybe I'll get away with it. You're not going to get away with it. And I feel eventually I arrived at a place that's I actually don't want to be in a room with anyone that doesn't humanize people like me. I don't want to make any money for anyone that doesn't humanize people like me, and I don't want to be given any money from anyone that kind of has blood on their hands for that. So I'm very content with the fact that I might not ever headline the pyramid stage because I talk about Palestine too much, or I'm too I just don't shut up. But I'm very happy with that. I'd much rather live in a normal sized house and be true to myself than live in a mansion and be a fucking pussy.
On that note, does anyone want to add anything to that? Or
I feel like I've spoken.
I feel that,
I think when you're occupying a space as a brown woman, as someone who has sort of Islamic roots, I think someone's going to attach a political message to you, no matter what. And so I think one thing that I really, really admire you for is the fact that you're owning that narrative through everything you do. because you can't really go through the Western music space and not have someone be like, oh, you made that song, is that about X and Y war? So yeah, I have a lot of respect that you're really, really owning it.
I think
it's amazing.
Yeah, on that, it's like our existence is political anyway, and so anything that we make is going to be political, and people, as you said, are going to attach something to it. So you may as well just, stand up for what you believe. And I think majority of people probably do feel like how we do anyway. And if everyone just kind of came out and said it, it wouldn't necessarily be controversial because it would just be the normal. So I think just encourage more people to actually use their voice in a positive way.
Yeah, no, 100%. Let's just have a round of applause for that. Thank you all for your questions, and a huge thank you to our creatives who brought this to life, and a huge congratulations to BODUR on your debut album once again.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and for sharing this experience with us. Feel free to head to the bar in a minute, and everyone will be around, I'm sure, for a while to chat. And there are 20 vinyls available. Get them whilst they're hot.
Yeah. It's not out for another 2 days, so it's exclusive.
Yes, and the album is out officially on Friday, so run that shit up. And yes, thank you so much, everybody.